In the middle of a record-breaking heat wave back in August, Twitter was tearing Taylor Swift to shreds. She wasn't in the news because of a song she wrote or some dress she wore. No, she was getting dragged because of her private jet emissions.
Taylor Swift has been rated the biggest celebrity CO2 polluter of the year so far.
The current narrative around inequality and climate change looks a lot like the findings of an Oxfam report on household income and emissions. The report found that the richest 1% emit double that of the poorest 50%. When we talk about economic inequality and emissions, we too often focus in on the connection between unequal consumption habits leading to unequal emissions. A lens that's only solution is a politics of less. One where decreasing personal consumption, traveling less, and having less is the only way to avoid climate chaos. For the ultra-rich, a contraction of wealth definitely needs to happen. But for the working class who are living paycheck to paycheck, this solution is unappealing and unrealistic. It also conveniently avoids the root cause of the climate crisis. All of this is not to say that looking at inequality is useless. Just the opposite. Inequality is an essential concept for tackling the climate crisis. But thanks to this commercial and the ad campaign that ran throughout the early 2000s alongside it, the carbon footprint has become one of the main vectors through which we view the climate crisis. And the masterminds behind this campaign was none other than BP. This oil giant orchestrated a multi-million-dollar ad blitz in order to popularize the idea of the carbon footprint and place the responsibility for climate change onto the individual consumer. Analysis of ExxonMobil's internal and external documents found that the company not only downplayed the climate crisis throughout the last 20 years, but also consistently framed it as a consumer demand problem rather than a fossil fuel supply problem, ultimately individualizing responsibility. It needs to change. When we talk about inequality and climate change, we need to zoom out and understand that this is not just a question of who has money and who doesn't and what they do with it, but a question of class. How the unequal ownership of production breeds environmental degradation. In other words, when we talk about inequality in relation to emissions, we need to focus on who controls and profits off of polluting industries. Words of Matt Huber, author of Climate Change as Class War, if we really want to understand a rich person's contribution to climate change, we shouldn't just look at their consumption. We should ask how they became rich in the first place. And when we start to look at inequality through that lens of who profits off of and who controls what's being produced and how it's being produced, we begin to see that there are just a few rich people actually driving the climate crisis.